It is my great pleasure to join this online conference to present my work entitled Pollutants, Polymers and Pigments, the Materiality of PET Bottles and Contaminants and its Implications to Waste Speakers in Brazil. My name is Tatiana Silva, and I'm a PhD candidate in International Development at the University of Edinburgh. Let's get started. This presentation examines the afterlife journey of polyethylene terephthalate bottles, or PET bottles, and discusses how the PET recycling chain is contingent upon the materiality of bottles and three of its most recurrent contaminants, i.e., pollutants, understood as debris of different types of matter, polymers, meaning other types of plastic resins, and pigments, or color additives. Acknowledging the active participation of PET bottles and contaminants in socio-political processes, this presentation explores how contingencies imposed by their materiality are appropriated by powerful actors partaking in the recycling chain, and reflects on the implication of this dynamics for informal waste collectors in Brazil, commonly known as waste pickers. This presentation draws on qualitative data collected during 6 months of fieldwork in Brazil, between August 2016 and February 2017. I have followed PET bottles from the moment they were first reclaimed by waste pickers working at Lixão Estrutural, the biggest dump site of Latin America, situated in Brasília, capital of Brazil, until their physical and chemical transformation into new bottles for cleaning products at a company based in the province of São Paulo, some hundreds of kilometers away. The concept of materiality, backbone of the analysis undertaken in this presentation, speaks of the social significance of materials as implicated in social acts, and of their connections and relations with subjects as constitutive parts of the social world. Materiality signals the capacity of objects and matter to consolidate and preserve social order, power, scale and hierarchy, i.e., of their think power to constrain human behavior along certain possibilities, enabling and limiting social interaction. After all, there is no such thing as uniquely active subjects and unavoidably passive objects. Things exert a constitutive and not merely instrumental force over human affairs. They are active parties or actants in the making of the social world, conditioning political life despite the still prevailing anthropocentric claims of political theory. Resources become, fundamentally through a process of abstraction, i.e., of homogenization and standardization on both material and conceptual levels, aiming at their exchangeability and fungibility in local and global markets. Abstraction is but the result of an entanglement between bodies, technologies, infrastructures, and substances, whereby elements are drawn into the assemblage and others expelled. Some elements, however, might resist to enter or to leave the assemblage, interfering in the abstraction process and hence challenging the becoming of resources. Such is the case of the contaminants examined in this presentation. The recalcitrant material presence of pollutants, polymers, and pigments disrupts the assemblage that concurs in the process of resource mobilization taking place as PET bottles are recycled, hence interfering with the configuration of the recycling chain. For PET to retain its properties and value, contaminants have to be expelled. Their presence is the liminal line that divides PET as resource and as waste, and as such arouses responses from agents partaking in the recycling chain. First, we shall examine how the materiality of bottles, pollutants, polymers, and pigments exert pressure over the configuration of the PET recycling chain, following which we shall analyze how agents deal with the contingencies imposed by the interactions between the materiality of bottles and contaminants. Brasília, capital of Brazil, hosts not only the headquarters of the main government apparatus of Brazil, but also the biggest operational dump site of Latin America, Lixão Estrutural. Covering an area of 200 hectares, Lixão Estrutural received 2,621 tons of unsorted municipal solid waste per day in 2015, being the single final disposal facility of Brasília. 93% of all the waste generated in Brasília is unsorted, i.e., not subject to source segregation by householders. Consequently, what were once immaculately clean bottles filled with crystalline water and soft drinks become muddy, dirty, greasy pieces of plastic by the time they reach the dump site. There, around 1,800 waste pickers toil searching for recyclables to make a living. They usually sell recyclables daily to middlemen operating in the dump site, whom then resell recyclables to buyers based in Brasília, commonly on a weekly basis. Recicle a Vida, a cooperative of informal waste sorters specialized in classifying and baling recyclables, is one of such buyers. It buys commingled plastics from middlemen at lixão estrutural. Plastics are synthetically produced polymers, i.e., long-chain molecules formed by the repetition of smaller identical units. Not all plastics have the same molecular structure or chemical composition, and are precisely these differences that ascribe them different properties. For these properties to be preserved in the recycling process, resins must be categorized. That is precisely what Recicle a Vida does. It creates dedicated streams for each of the polymers that fall under the general category plastics and bale them separately. The cooperative usually sells PET, the most abundant of plastics, to Brasil Limpo, a wholesaler of reclaimed plastics with business in 13 out of the 26 Brazilian provinces. Among Brasil Limpo's top PET trading partners is MG Fibras, a company that produces polyester fiber, both virgin and recycled, for application mostly in the textile industry, and post-consumer recycled PET pellets, widely used by the packaging sector. Brasil Limpo only intermediates the transaction. PET bottles are shipped straight from Recicle a Vida's shed to MG Fibras plant in a 750 kilometers long road journey. Color pigments eventually contained in bottles are not extracted in the recycling process. Hence, the color of post-consumer recycled PET pellets and recycled polyester fiber will depend on the color of bottles being used as input in the process. If bottles of different colors are processed together, the resulting product will be brownish and therefore of limited application. Thus, bottles have to be color sorted before being fed into the recycling plant's conveyor belt. Until very recently, PET packaging only came in 3 colors: clear, for high-end soft drinks like Coca-Cola and Pepsi; green, for regional soft drinks widely available in Brazil; and blue, for water bottles. The last couple of years, however, witnessed the entrance in the market of PET bottles coming on a variety of different shades outside of the dominant trichromatic spectrum, to which currently there is no recycling market. Colored PET inundated the market as an aftermath of the global trend verified in the packaging industry, mainly in the dairy, home, and personal care sectors, to progressively switch from HDPE, high-density polyethylene, to PET, polyethylene terephthalate. Red bottles of ketchup, yellow bottles of mustard, and white opaque bottles of milk, all previously made from HDPE, are now being produced with PET. Hermes, communication manager at ABPET, the Brazilian Association of the PET Industry, attributes this migration trend to the properties of PET, claiming that it has characteristics that no other plastic resin has. Arguably, PET has the best touch feel, offers a strong mechanic and chemical resistance, is the most transparent and brilliant, and the easiest to shape amongst the thermoplastic resins, therefore very appealing for marketing purposes. Química Amparo, a chemical company that operates in the home care segment in Brazil with industrial plant in São Paulo, is one of the companies that embarked in this polymer switch. Some of its packaging, previously made with HDPE, are now being produced with post-consumer recycled PET pellets bought from MG Fibras. Flowchart 1, shown on the screen, provides an overview of the PET recycling chain followed in this research. Next, we shall examine how human agents react to the limitations and pressures posed by the interaction between PET bottles and each of the contaminants covered in this presentation, starting with pollutants. The responsivity of agents will depend on the power they hold compared to others partaking in the recycling chain, and consequently on their capacity to make their interests prevail. Remnants of the material coexistence of PET bottles with fruit scraps, diapers, and all sorts of disposables that one can think of, or pollutants as I refer to them, invoking Douglas' conceptualization of pollution, i.e., objects or ideas that contradict a systematic classification of matter, leave an imprint on bottles, interfering in the PET recycling chain and ultimately affecting waste pickers' position in it. Unsorted waste collection costs the government of Brasília the equivalent to £20 per ton, whereas selective waste collection of source-segregated recyclables costs around £45 per ton. Even if the operational costs of managing lixão estrutural are added up, around £7 per ton, conventional unsorted waste collection remains considerably more attractive in the kind of short-term, cost-oriented evaluation that usually guides decision-makers in the public sector in Brazil. Buyers at different stages of the PET recycling chain report losses of between 20 and 30% of the purchased volume associated with the presence of pollutants. To mitigate losses, PET recycling companies like MG Fibras usually enforce a deferred payment policy, transferring funds to suppliers only 4 days after the material has reached their plant. The practice allows them to process the load, assess the amount of pollutants in it, and eventually apply unilateral price discounts. If suppliers do not work to reduce contamination, they can be suspended or even cut off as trading partners. Unilateral price discounts are passed along the recycling chain by buyers to suppliers until reaching middlemen at lixão estrutural. One of the main side effects of the deferred payment policy is that it helps maintain and reproduce the current configuration of the recycling chain. Waste pickers cooperatives do not usually have working capital and hence cannot afford to wait for MG Fibras to process recyclables in order to be paid. Ergo, they're bound to sell to wholesalers like Brasil Limpo, whom pay upfront. The policy, however, has rebound effects over MG Fibras itself, compromising 2 of its voluntary commitments, namely to ensure traceability in the supply chain and to refrain from sourcing bottles from dump sites. The more intermediaries there are in the value chain, the less MG Fibras is able to control its sources of supply and ultimately contamination. Keen on trading directly with cooperatives, MG Fibras is now working around the limitations of its policy, trying to find a middle ground to secure both traceability, provenance, and quality. Caps and labels are customarily made from plastic resins like polypropylene, PP, and low-density polyethylene, LDPE. MG Fibras relies on a label-removing machine and on a float sink tank to separate PET bottles from labels and caps, as their presence can adversely affect the quality of post-consumer recycled PET. Nonetheless, these processes are inefficient to remove the increasingly popular full-wrap heat-shrink sleeve labels, usually made from polyvinyl chloride, PVC. Standard automatic delabeling equipment cannot peel off full-wrap labels. To complicate things further, PVC has a density similar to that of PET, and therefore sinks along with PET flakes in decantation tanks, contaminating the recycling stream. Despite the incompatibility between PVC sleeve labels and the PET recycling process, there is no indication that PVC shrink labels will be phased out. These are persistently being associated by marketing strategists with higher sales due to its supposedly enhanced shelf presence and compellingly contoured shapes, based mostly on anecdotal evidence. As a result, the burden of dealing with PVC lies upon the end-of-life segment of the PET value chain. Since the recycling market for PET in Brazil operates as an oligopsony, where there are only a handful of large recycling companies buying PET bottles, they are in a position to impose conditions of trade upon sellers. MG Fibras, as other big recyclers in Brazil, prefers to avoid the PVC nuisance, and therefore do not buy PET bottles with PVC labels, requiring suppliers to refrain from mixing this in PET bales, subject to discounts and even termination of relations. Such policy is passed along the recycling chain, forcing waste pickers to segregate PET bottles with full-wrap PVC shrink labels. If recycling companies can afford to choose which types of bottles they will buy, for waste pickers and sorters it is not so much of a choice as every tiny bit counts. PET is amongst the recyclables with the highest yields per kilogram, with numerous cooperatives reporting that it accounts for more than half of their monthly revenue, as it is the case of Recicla a Vida. Aiming to salvage PET bottles wrapped in PVC sleeve labels, Recicla a Vida created a dedicated stream for such bottles, and encourages sorters to remove PVC labels by paying them 5 times more per kilogram of sleeveless PET bottles compared to the price ordinarily paid for the kilogram of recyclables. The cooperative, however, does not receive 1 penny more for sleeveless PET bottles. These are worth in the recycling market the same as clear PET, their usual color, i.e. 42 pence per kilogram as of August 2016. Squeezed by irresponsible producers and the oligopsonic power of recycling companies, cooperatives like Recicla a Vida absorb the burden of dealing with contaminating polymers, like PVC, with no reward. As a rule, large recyclers like MG Fibras only buy bales of PET bottles sorted by color. Carnivalesque bales, as they refer to bales of PET bottles of assorted colors, are not usually traded and in fact are rarely ever tradable in this market. Accordingly, in order to be able to trade with big recycling companies, suppliers need to have a reasonably sized shed to carry out color sorting, and yet more importantly, to build a decent stock of bottles of the same color to attract big buyers. This is not so much an issue for wholesalers like Brasil Limpo, specialized in trading plastics, but players at the bottom of the recycling chain, like waste pickers cooperatives, often deal with multiple recyclables: paper, cardboard, plastics, and metals. Sorting and stocking materials not only by type, but also by color, can therefore become a spatially problematic issue. Color sourcing PET bottles before baling, however, is not guaranteed that this will be tradable in the market. Recycling companies only purchase clear, green, or blue PET bottles, preference given for the first one. Since clear bottles have no pigments, post-consumer recycled PET pellets and recycled polyester fiber made from them can be transparent or dyed in any color, hence the proclivity to buy them. Bottles dyed in shades following out of this trichromatic spectrum have no market, hence why waste pickers dub them rubbish PET. The reason for such color restrictions is not so much associated with the kind of pigment being used, to its chemical composition and properties, as it is to the volume in which bottles containing different pigments are available in the market. While clear, green, and blue bottles are abundant, other colors are available only in small quantities, so the recycling industry has not yet developed applications for them. Precisely because they are not so prevalent, it is impractical for players at the bottom end of the recycling chain, especially for the smaller and least endowed, to have dedicated sorting streams for each of these less ordinary colors. To do so would require considerable time and space, 2 things they cannot usually spare. Hence, it is common for waste pickers cooperatives to bale rubbish PET in carnivalesque bales or dispose of them all along. As of September 2016, Recicla a Vida had accumulated 38 tons of carnivalesque bales of rubbish PET. Hermes, from ABPET, argues that it is precisely because waste pickers are failing to sort bottles correctly that they cannot find a market for it. Cleusimar, director of Recicla a Vida, offers a diametrically opposite perspective. According to him, the phenomenon of rubbish PET is the result of a neglect on the part of producers that care only for economic and possibly aesthetic aspects when designing packaging, and that without any consideration for the environment, for society, or for waste pickers, put a type of packaging in the market that, despite technically recyclable, has no commercial value. The capacity of pollutants, polymers, and pigments to assert themselves, endangering and defying the mobilization of PET bottles into resources again, challenges reactions on the part of the agents they act upon. As Newtonian physics reminds us, forces come in pairs. Ergo, for every action, there is always a reaction. Nonetheless, contradicting Newton's third law, opposing forces in the social world are not always equal, because power is unevenly distributed amongst agents. Reactions to the thickness of pollutants, polymers, and pigments will therefore depend on the agent's capacity to impose his or her interests. And usually, individuals with the power to capture material contingencies to their benefit, determining how resource mobilization will take place, are rarely ever the ones who have a subsistence relationship to this very same resource. Whilst others maneuver around the constraints posed by the material agents of pollutants, polymers, and pigments so as to maximize their earnings and minimize their spending, what can be evinced by the short-term, cost-oriented evaluation of government agencies, the discount policies enforced by buyers, the deferred payment policy of recycling companies, or the strictly marketing concerns of packaging producers, just to recap a few of the examples examined in this presentation, waste pickers are forced to confront the materiality of contaminants despite being the least financially and technically endowed for it. The combination of the thickness of contaminants and the reactions they evoke from human agents partaking in the recycling chain can adversely affect waste pickers, contributing to their marginalization to the extent that, without the means to resist the power pressure of upstream agents, waste pickers become victims of their free riding. Solutions are drawn in response to how problems are defined. The representation of a problem forecloses some forms of action while allowing others to make sense, as teaches Le Born. By shedding light over the materiality of bottles and contaminants as an element actively interfering in the configuration of the recycling chain, and hence influencing waste pickers' position in it, this presentation challenges the current representation of the problem of their socioeconomic exclusion. In so doing, it hopes to contribute to open up new forms of actions previously untaught. As Grusin ponders, if we take society as a complex assemblage of human and non-human actors, then the question of political or social change becomes a question of changing our relations not only to other humans, but to non-humans as well. I conclude thanking all the viewers for their time and attention, and invite you to submit comments about how this work can be improved through the email shown in the screen.